Amen.
Amen. Okay, and we're both constantly on screen.
Okay. Oh, that's good.
5 seconds. Hello and welcome to The Watering Hole. My name is Jonathan Thomas. I'm the pastor of Cornerstone Church in Abergavenny. And every once in a while we have these Sunday evening sessions on YouTube where I invite someone in to have an interview and to talk about a different aspect of life and the Christian faith and meaning. And this evening, I've got Kristi Mair with us, and we're going to find out more about her in a while. But Kristi, I hope you don't mind. I love in the evening watching Would I Lie to You? And I've always fancied myself as a poor man's Rob Brydon. So I thought, could we have a little game, a little bit like Would I Lie to You, where you tell us 2 truths and 1 lie. And then we're going to try and see if we can spot the lie. And so if I explain to folk at home how this, you can think of the 2 truths and a lie. Let me explain to everybody back home. It is possible for you now to vote in this. We're using something this evening called Slido. You can get Slido up on your phone or on your iPad, your device, or on your computer. You can see there the link for it. Go on to Slido, and on Slido there is a poll. There is a poll, and when Kristi now shares these 3 things, 2 facts and a lie, you can choose on the poll which one you think is the lie. So which one isn't true? I think this will be a fun way to get to know you. So hopefully everybody's popping onto Slido at the moment. So Kristi, tell us 3 things, 2 truths and a lie.
I'm sweating, I'm nervous. Okay, here we go. Well, the last time I went scuba diving, I was stung by a jellyfish. Would not recommend. When I was a fresher, I had the TV aerial antennae stuck to my head and I had to drive myself to A&E for it to be removed. And when I was a second year, I thought the best way to get rid of my Christmas tree was by running it over Top Gear style, but it got stuck to the bottom of the car.
Okay, I wasn't quite expecting those. So can you share those again? So A, the first one.
A, the last time I went scuba diving, I was stung by a jellyfish. Would not recommend. 2, when I was a fresher, I got the TV antenna, I think, so it was back in the day, wasn't it? Stuck to my head and I had to drive myself to A&E to have it removed. And the third one was that when I was a second year, I thought the best way to dispose of my Christmas tree was by running it over, but it got stuck underneath the car.
Brilliant. Now, I thought this was going to be pretty easy to figure out. I'm wondering if all 3 are lies. That is brilliant. So back home, maybe on a poll, you can show us. So do you think that it's A, scuba diving, being stung by a jellyfish, getting an antenna stuck on your head, which sounds brilliant, or running over a Christmas tree Top Gear style, which I really hope is true, because I just love the sound of that. So let's wait and see as the truths come in. Now, as people are thinking about that, figuring their way around Slido, the reason we're doing this poll at the start is because this evening we're looking at the whole subject of truth. Truth. Can we know what is true? Does it matter if something is true or not? And how do you find out the truth? Now, whilst people are voting, Kristi, tell us a little bit more about yourself. So apart from a wannabe Top Gear kind of crazy driver, maybe, tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, what you do at the moment. That would be great.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, it's a real joy being with you all this evening. I'm originally from Hungary and I moved to the UK when I was about, it doesn't really fluctuate, but it was kind of like 5, 6, 7, 8. I kept going back and forth. So raised in like Leicestershire area, spent about 13 years of my life in Birmingham. Now I'm in North London, where I'm based at a theological college. I'm doing my part-time PhD, do a little bit of teaching on the side, and I get to do great things like this.
Brilliant. Now, would we understand what your PhD is in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's pretty much in what we're talking about this evening. It's truth. It's epistemology, which would be the formal kind of title, which really just means study of knowledge. And I'm kind of focusing in on a particular area of that, looking at 2 people and thinking like theologically, what does it move from kind of darkness to light? What does that look like? And how do we account for knowing in a way that's very different from the from some philosophical schools and how they do that. So there you go. That's as vague and probably as abstract and boring as I can make it.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I mean, yeah, and so that's great, because on this subject of truth, hopefully, as you're going to be a doctor of truth, that's all about that.
Will we ever get there?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And then in terms of kind of fun, what do you like to do do you get time to relax if you're doing a PhD and teaching? I mean, if you did have relaxing downtime, what would you do?
Well, usually, I mean, if we weren't in lockdown number 3, I'd probably be kind of spending time with friends, reading books. I still do that, seeing films, going to the cinema, going for long walks, still do that. That's great. Catching up with people around the country. I kind of do a few conferences here and there. Seeing family. Some of my family still in Hungary and Romania, so I kind of go back quite often. And yeah, a little bit of everything, really, like that, I guess. I love the British Museum, National Art Gallery. Oh, there's just a wealth of treasure there. So yeah, I dabble a bit, but mainly it's around friends and kind of art, historical artifacts, that kind of thing.
Well, look, Abergavenny's got a museum in the castle, so fancy checking something out. Now, I did notice there, as an investigative kind of person, that you didn't mention scuba diving as.
Well, there isn't really anywhere to do that near London.
Well, no,
I go kayaking, however, so I do enjoy kayaking.
Okay, well, look, we've got the votes in, so I'm going to see now. I think I just press stop. Let's see what happens. Here we go. Oh, right. So people think which one you're lying. So they all assume that you've driven over a Christmas tree.
I love that. Thanks, guys.
That's brilliant. So 25% think that the TV aerial is the lie. But overwhelmingly, scuba diving, 75% of people think that you haven't been stung by a jellyfish. So, Christy, which one is the lie?
They're right. I haven't been stung by a jellyfish. I have been scuba diving, however, but I've never been stung whilst doing that. So, yeah, what gave it away? Is it the most normal out of the 3 that?
I know the last 2 definitely did sound like classic student things to do, which is brilliant. Well, there we are. Okay, now we know Slido's working. Now we know a little bit more about you, Christy. We're going to look at truth. And I guess there we saw actually sometimes it's, you can work out what is true, but sometimes it is hard to tell fact from fiction. So here's my question for you. When did lying begin? I mean, where does lying come from? Can we know where it's come from?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it is terribly difficult, isn't it, to tell the difference between fact and fiction? Because lying really is it's a distortion of reality. So there's usually an element of truth in it. So like my little, I've been scuba diving, but I haven't been stung by a jellyfish. So it's usually a distortion of reality. It's a distortion of truth. And when we think about where it kind of came from, well, lying kind of entered the world when humanity listened to an unauthorized voice, an unauthorized guide. And so rather than trusting in the goodness of an authorized guide, God himself, it chose to act on the basis of what this other voice said. So lying hasn't always been around. It entered the world at a specific moment in time when humanity chose to follow the voice of a distortion of reality at a specific point, which seemed to offer more than what we already had. And so after that, then humanity really did kind of fall for the lie. And since then, lying is a part of, I guess, our broken nature, being separated from God. So actually, it shows how powerful these untrustworthy voices are, because they don't just affect, things out there, but it affects things in here. There's a personal kind of impact due to the perversion of reality that comes through lying. So yeah, it did have a specific point in time in which it came in, because we listened to an untrustworthy, unauthorized guide who led us astray. And since then, it's been part of our DNA in some ways.
And it's interesting there that you talk about lying as a distortion of truth, but as well something that kind of affects us. So, I mean, does it really matter if we lie? What's the problem with, a little white lie or a little exaggeration? Is there a problem with it?
Yeah, it's I was thinking about this because when we were playing that game, for example, I quite happily I guess lied to you. But I lied to you because I knew that we were all playing a game and you were intentionally looking for an embedded lie. So you were expecting me to lie to you. And so the problem kind of arises is when we intentionally distort reality to suit our own ends, our own purpose in some way. And so this is slightly more nuanced than that, but it does it shows itself in, alternative facts, post-truth, Pizzagate, conspiracy theories, fake news. It's dangerous. So that's why it's problematic, because it does have more of those personal implications where it's not, again, something that you can just say. This has real life ramifications for how people live their lives and how they respond. And also it kind of goes against the nature of things, because we're talking in such, when we're lying, we're saying that something isn't the way it really is. So we're also kind of distorting creation and nature, as well as using that to our own ends. So it's corrupting, it's dishonoring, and it's destructive. However, it is a bit more nuanced. And so when we're looking at, I guess, kind of like if we're looking at a history of lying, for example, then church history has two different options when it comes to lying. And the first option is that it is permissible to lie. You can tell a noble lie, but only if you're doing that with good intention. So you've got people like, there's Clement of Alexandria, there's Chrysostom, there's Jerome, there's even Bonhoeffer, who you may have heard of, who he wrote a great book on this. And there's a great article actually that he wrote on this called Truth Telling. And so there's that kind of half that says, no, it's okay to lie with good intention, because we can see examples through the Bible where people like Rahab or the Hebrew midwives, they kind of distorted the truth in order to kind of save someone's life, for example, or to help others. So for example, there was this just on that, I came across this little story of Athanasius, who he was fleeing his persecutors down the Nile, and these persecutors found him and they said to him, "Oh, have you seen Athanasius anywhere? We hear he's just around here." And he replied by saying, "Well, I believe he's in the area," and then kind of carried on. And so that's kind of like the example of the noble lie. You can do it but with good intention like that. But then the other kind of stream says, no, you can't lie under any circumstances, and not even with good intent. So this is where, you've got the big daddies of theology like Augustine and Calvin, who'd be more kind of saying that, with the example of the Hebrew midwives, those children weren't saved because they lied, but because God was merciful in that situation. Or I think later on, Augustine kind of uses the example, but can't you kind of hide a persecuted people group, and then that's a good thing to do, and then if the people who are pursuing them knock on your door, you lie and you say, no, I don't have them. They'd say, actually, Augustine would say, well, no, you can't do that, because it's better for you to die and for them to die than for the soul to perish in any way. Because what you've done by lying is you're offering an alternative reality, and because God is truth, you're putting forward something that's just so kind of contrary to God's nature by lying. And there's a great example on that as well. There was this guy called Firmus in church history. He was called before the emperor for having done exactly this. He'd hidden somebody. So the emperor called him up and was like, dude, well, probably not in those words, but tell me, release this person. And he replied saying that I can't tell a lie, and nor can I betray a fellow man. And the emperor was so impressed by this, by his kind of moral integrity and conduct was so admirable, that he actually obtained a pardon for both him and the person whom he was hiding. And so there's those examples, really. So you've got some who say you can tell a noble lie if it's with good intent, and then others like Augustine and Calvin who'd say, no, it's never lawful. It goes against the nature of God. But they might say it's okay to conceal something They call that dissimulation, rather than to aim to pretend to do something. It's okay to conceal. So there's lots of nuance in that. But on the whole, lying is a distortion of reality, and you have to deal with the consequences of that. And I think that is the other example that's often given, is that if there is an axe murderer at the door looking for your friend, and you lie and say, my friend isn't here, they've gone next door. What if that friend has actually scurried next door while you were telling that lie, and now they've been killed as a result of your lie? Whereas if you hadn't have lied, perhaps they would have gotten away. So there are all these kind of big questions or implications as a result of lying and what it is. But I think they're the big kind of markers in two options in church history.
And I guess, probably a lot of people like me now, listening, thinking, okay, I kind of knew it was nuanced, but I didn't realize it was that kind of, nuanced, and all of these different people having all of these different opinions. It's really hard sometimes to know what to do, and how serious a lie is. But I guess we are saying, it's the intent behind the lie. So, you call it a noble lie. Perhaps there's something there. And I think lots of us can understand that. I guess one of the issues in today's society, and one of the frustrations, is perhaps when we get to feel that people are lying to us or concealing truth from us, not nobly, but because of personal gain, particularly people in power over us. There seems to be something even more frustrating when someone in power over you lies. So politician, perhaps. That is very very hard. Maybe we'll come back to that. So look, folk at home, you can, if you want to now, go on Slido and put in some questions. I won't chase everything down with Christy now. I'll let you put the question in, and later on, if you want to pick up on any of these things, then put it in Slido, and after this we'll have the last half of our time together picking up on questions from home. But let's go to the other side. Let's go to truth. We've thought about lying. Let's think about truth. Just as we try to figure out the truth with you, is it possible to know the truth about everything? I guess lots of people would say we can investigate and know the truth about things that we can test scientifically, but maybe not in terms of faith. What do you think? Can we know the truth on everything?
Oh, this is such a lovely question. And I'm going to say, no, we can't know the truth about everything. But that doesn't mean that we can't know truly. So we can know truly, but we can't know exhaustively. And that's mainly because truth isn't about certainty. So there's this kind of post-enlightenment ideal when it comes to knowledge that says either we know something completely inside out, back to front, or you have to say we don't know it whatsoever. So if by saying, can we know truth about everything, we mean that kind of knowledge, that kind of certain knowledge, then no, we can't, because all of our knowledge rests on a certain level of confidence. So, for example, Jonathan, at what temperature does water boil?
The boiling temperature.
Yes, the boiling temperature, which you're not a scientist, are you? I think is around.
I haven't got a clue about anything.
Even to make your cup of tea or coffee there, unbelievable. You see, you can know things with confidence. So you know that there is a boiling, there is a temperature at which water boils, and that's usually about 100 degrees Celsius. But if you're kind of I've been told by some scientists that if it depends on your geographical kind of positioning. If you're higher or lower on the earth or something like that, then it will boil at slightly, like marginally different temperatures. But to know that water boils at 100 degrees, we don't every time we make a cup of tea, for example, put a thermometer in and say, okay, this is at 100 degrees. We have confidence that it's at that, but we don't actually know with certainty that it's 100 degrees because it could be on the fluctuating end of things. And so with those kind of claims, that's actually kind of a form of, well, that's a scientific, it's kind of saying that scientific endeavor in those ways is rooted bodily in my I guess, in the way in which I follow the clues to understand what is going on in a particular instant. So in that sense, all knowing is an act of faith, because I'm committing myself, I'm trusting on the basis of an authoritative guide, who in this sense would be either a science teacher when I was younger, or Google maybe, or whomever, to be telling me the truth. And I act in trust on the basis of that truth. So in that sense, we cannot know, we don't know everything, but we can know things truly like that and act with confidence, but we'll never know anything with certainty, because you don't need to know that water boils at 100 degrees in order to boil water. It's still, there's a kind of like a nature and a nature of things that is still true, despite my ability or inability to understand it completely.
Yeah, I find it amazing how many things we assume is true, and it's just the way it is, which is fascinating. And I guess sometimes the more you investigate, sometimes you can see more, but I guess you can't investigate everything all the time.
No, exactly. And so in that sense, all knowing is an act of trust. So when you get onto, well, when we used to, in those days of yore, when we used to board planes, you don't know with certainty that that plane isn't going to fall out of the sky, but you've got confidence that it won't. And probably it won't, but you don't know that it won't, because it is an act of trust. All knowing is an act of trust. It might, but we hope it won't, which is a bit discombobulating, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that really is. I'm glad I'm not going on a plane today. Thanks for that. But in terms of truth, Christians talk about truth a lot, and it's a big word for Christians. So what does it mean to know truth? What does that mean when someone says that?
That's such a big question, I think, and a really excellent question that many of us are asking, particularly now at the moment, as you mentioned, kind of politicians and post-truth and former occupants of the White House and all sorts of things. I think it kind of depends on what we mean by know and what we mean by truth, like how we define those two terms. The way I've kind of come to understand it is it's a little bit like Sherlock Holmes, who on any good murder mystery has an array of clues before him. And it's as he's kind of putting these clues together. For example, there's a body in front of the mantelpiece. There's the clock is smashed at 12 p.m. and there's a large piece of cement, say, right to the body. They're all different clues. And to begin with, you have no idea how those clues relate to one another. But it's as Sherlock starts to kind of bring these clues together and finds out what will actually help him and what actually isn't a clue, but it's kind of just like a red herring. You only find that out afterwards. And so it's as we kind of, in humility and not out of mastery or control, we submit ourselves to these clues, that they come together in a transformative way. So for Sherlock, he will probably come to the conclusion that, oh, there was an earthquake, which he didn't know about. The cement fell down from the ceiling. It hit the guy kind of on the head, and there was other kind of debris which struck the clock at 12. But the timing of the earthquake, which is 12, doesn't really have a causal effect other than the earthquake upon the person kind of dying. But it's only then that you know which of those clues were relevant to solve the puzzle. And so there's a great philosopher called Esther Meek building on the work of someone called Michael Polanyi, who is he was a scientist, a premier scientist turned philosopher. And it was actually from his experience in the sciences that he started to ask the question, well, how do we account for our coming to know something? When you know that there's something to know, but you don't yet know it, how do you know that there's something even yet to know? And that's one of Plato's, I think that's the Meno kind of paradox. So how do we, what does it mean to know truth? I think a part of that is submitting ourselves to these clues and allowing them to come together in a way that I am not manipulating the outcome, but I'm letting them kind of come together in a transformative way, so that it's like riding a bike, for example. You indwell the physical clues, you're learning balance, direction, and to begin with, you're focusing on the bike. But then there's a moment, there's an unspecified, and it's really important that it's an unspecifiable moment at which those clues come together. And you don't actually know when that is, but you realize you're actually riding the bike, and you're not thinking about your, your weight, your balance, your positioning. You're just riding the bike. And then to think that you're riding the bike just feels like an absurdity. And if you start thinking how you're doing it, you stop doing it, and it kind of collapses. But you're riding the bike because there's an indeterminate, Polanyi calls this as an indeterminate future manifestations, where you can ride that bike in so many different ways that you haven't yet specified. And so in that sense, to know the truth, it's not about mastering reality. Its truth is fundamentally revelatory. It's revealed and it's disclosed to us. That means we can't control it. And it's so, because it's disclosed to us, it's actually, there's something that philosophers call transcendental properties of being, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it basically means that
I wish I could say that, but I not with my accent.
Oh, no, it would be really lovely, Jonathan. It would be. Which means that, like, there's truth, there's goodness, and there's beauty that's been written into creation. And these are these properties which find their source in God. So, for example, like, let me think. Well, I guess riding the bike was one of them. Learning how to light a fire or whatever it is. It's kind of revealed to us in a way as we submit to those clues. And again, we don't need to know exhaustively how that works. We don't need to know how oxidation works in order to light a fire. But truth is disclosed to us. And so our attitude, our posture then has to be one of humility and listening and allowing ourselves to be changed by this truth in front of us. So sorry, that's a very long-winded answer, but essentially, what does it mean to know the truth? It means that we allow truth to speak to us rather than us speaking at and determining truth for ourselves. We indwell the clues, we follow them, and there's a eureka moment at which they come together in a transformative way as truth is revealed.
So I mean, that would maybe seem quite counterintuitive. I think often we think of, we investigate and we discover the truth. Maybe we would use that kind of language. Whereas you're saying really what we're doing is, as we investigate or discover, actually it's being revealed to us. The truth is already there. It's there, and I guess the truth doesn't change dependent on our investigation. It's already there.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are good ways of stewarding truth and bad ways of stewarding truth. So, for example, I play the cello badly, but there are ways in which you can play a musical instrument that will sound good because you're going with the grain of reality, of the way in which that musical instrument has been made. But there's also a bad way to play the cello, which could actually destroy the cello. And so, yeah, in that sense, I am submitting myself to, I guess it's not, I'm submitting myself to the nature of the thing before me, that to know it, to understand it, I need to move towards it on its terms and not on my terms. And so, yes, in that sense, learning to play the cello and producing a good sound, if we're calling that truth, if we're calling that something that is in line with its nature, that is what it looks like to play well, then that is how we go about it.
Mm. Okay, so there's truth out there. We can discover this truth. Let me push you a bit. You work in a theological college. I'm a minister of a church, and one of the big things in the Bible is Jesus Christ comes into the world, and he makes some pretty strong statements. We know lots of them. The golden rule. Love one another and treat each other as you'd want to be treated. But I mean, he also says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then goes even further and says, no one comes to the Father but by me, through me. And he's claiming to be truth, and in a sense there, he's also claiming to be an exclusive truth. I mean, that's quite arrogant, isn't it? I mean, aren't all religions the same? Can one man make that claim?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is, thank you for asking me this question. This question comes up a lot and rightly so, because the way in which we kind of understand truth in society today is all these like mini narratives. It's these mini meanings, these mini truths. And so in that sense, if we're taking arrogance to mean an exaggerated sense of one's abilities, then for any person to kind of say, hello, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, it would be, yeah, that is absolutely arrogant for you to say that. Prove it. And so it's only arrogant if that truth is self-made and it can't be substantiated in some way. And so I think that's where Christianity is utterly unique among all of the world religions. I mean, there's hints of wisdom, like wise ways of living in some of them. So for example, in Shintoism with Mary Kondo, when you're thinking about get rid of all the clutter, just keep what sparks joy. Yeah, there's a bit of practical wisdom there. I don't want my living room to be overrun with clothes from 20 years ago. Get rid of it. Great. There's a practical element, but obviously this is tied very closely to a particular kind of way of seeing the world and understanding particularly kind of spirits and how they interact with the material kind of element around us, such as clothes. And so all of these kind of different religions make very different claims on reality, on human nature, on what God is like, on what the problem is for all of us, and on what the cure or the hope is, and eternal life. And so this is where Christianity is really unique, because here, as you mentioned, we have Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, and life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. And so his claim here is one of deity, where he's saying he's kind of there's a quality between him and God, in that he is the one who's able to reveal God the Father. And when he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, I think the way there is the head term. So truth and life are kind of subsequent to him being the way. So he is the true, he is the way to true life, would be another way of kind of thinking about that. And so because he is the Son of God who's taken on flesh, he's kind of saying, well, and elsewhere he does say this in John's account of Jesus, where he says, look at my works will show you who I am. And so that is, I think, what is so unique, is that we have God himself entering the world stage, who lives, remarkably suffers and dies. No deity does that. I mean, that's just gross. And then there's this kind of incredible claim of this resurrection, where he comes back bodily from the dead and then goes to be with the Father. I mean, these are huge, huge claims. And so if that was made up, then yeah, that would be totally arrogant. But I don't think it is made up, because of the works of those works themselves. And I think that's where we're all called to examine the evidence and see for ourselves.
Yeah, and it is, isn't it? I think, often, two comments people will say to me, kind of, when I maybe try to share with them the good news of Jesus. And, sometimes people will say something like, well, I'm too scientific. I think things through too much. Or other people will say something like, oh, I wish I could have your faith. And I think sometimes behind that is the assumption that to become a Christian, you have to just switch off your kind of rational mind and just kind of believe in the unbelievable. But interestingly, there you're saying, well, look at his works, look at the evidence, weigh that up, and kind of going back to what maybe you said 5-10 minutes ago, that actually there is a truth out there to be discovered as it reveals itself to us. Now, you've written a book on truth. I've asked you to share about this book, so you didn't ask me. But you've written a book, and it's a short book, but it's jam-packed, and it's really helpful. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what the book covers before I say something about it?
Oh yeah, thank you. It was really kind of you to mention this. Here is my little copy of this very short very small book. This kind of book, More Truth, was birthed in the process in conversation with my editor when we were kind of chatting and we're saying, what are the big questions that people have? And one of them obviously is truth. But the thing is, none of us have loads of time to be able to delve deeply into this topic, and nor does this book, but it kind of gives you a kind of a sweet kind of entree into knowing and how do we know. And it kind of looks at the person and work of Jesus in understanding what knowing is. So if you're reading this as someone who's like, oh yeah, I'm a Jesus follower, then this will kind of help you to kind of start a conversation on the topic of truth. Or if you're thinking, well, I'd like to think a little bit more about this, I wouldn't really call myself a Jesus follower, then you can read over someone's shoulder and see how a Christian would kind of start to understand this. But also then at the end, there is a chapter on thinking about how we engage with apathetic or skeptical truth seekers. And so if that's you, that's quite an interesting short chapter. So yeah, this is a very short book, just a kind of little entree into the topic, and hopefully we'll springboard a few conversations, discussions for you, and help you to start thinking about the topic of truth.
Yeah, it's definitely worth reading. I really enjoyed reading it, and funnily enough, stuff I'd kind of heard in the past, you know, different names of different philosophers and words like enlightenment and things like that. And actually, you write it in such a way that even for people like me, it makes sense. So that's
he
really
says
good.
with all those books on his bookshelf. Look at that.
As I said, I sit in front of a bookcase to kind of make me look more intelligent than I am. You can just sit behind in front of a piano. You're fine. Some people have sent some questions in which are really helpful. So let's pick up on these questions. And again, back home, if you want to ask anything, now's your opportunity. Send it in on Slido, and we'll pick up. The first one, I guess, is picking up on what you said. It says, given what you said about clues coming together, do you think the age of enlightenment reason has actually made finding truth more difficult for us?
Ooh, what a great question. Sorry, I'm just jotting this down because
Yeah.
at a certain time in the evening, I'll just talk about anything I want to without actually answering the question. So hold me to account. Yeah, has it made finding truth more difficult for us? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. In that, one of the enlightenment task, there's a really good pulse to it. So prior to the Enlightenment, when church kind of had the main say over what is truth, but didn't really kind of share how to understand or to know this truth for oneself, people came a little bit alienated, rightly so, because the pillars for truth were pretty much on like it's the authority of the church, tradition, scripture, and so what the Enlightenment task is trying to do to some extent is kind of say, well, how is it reasonable for us to kind of trust in these different authorities and these different sources? It's just asserted kind of de facto that this should be what we do and the way in which we go. And so in that sense, what the Enlightenment was trying to do was perhaps it overstepped, was showing like, how does human reason kind of fit in to this? So how can we know anything truly? And then you've got the sciences that came about, some really great kind of discoveries and ways of seeing the world, like really wonderful, which has shaped the world significantly since. But there has been a strand through the Enlightenment thinking which has turned it into a totalizing account of knowledge, which is that whole knowledge is certainty. Can you put it under the microscope? And if you can't, then you can't say that you know it. So there's this dichotomy in knowing, which has been around for a long time, even before the Enlightenment, but was kind of brought to the fore a little bit. I mean, this comes through Plato even before him, in that there's the world and everything we see, and then there's this kind of other realm which we don't have access to. And so truth kind of really belongs in this other realm, in this world of the forms. And then we kind of have a glimpse of that in everyday objects. So this table is only kind of an archetype of the true table, which exists on this other plane, but I don't really have direct access to that plane. And so there's this kind of suspicion and cynicism that's been around for a very long time, that you can't actually trust that the thing in front of you, like my table, you can probably hear me tapping on it, is actually true table. What's its true nature? I don't know. And so the Enlightenment is really kind of drinking some of that water and questioning what's come before it, which has been kind of blanket authority of church authorities and tradition, and then saying, okay, what does human reason look like in that? So yeah, it hasn't. I think what it's done is it's eroded our confidence in knowing. I think that's what it's done. So it's not that it has made it more difficult, but it's made it more difficult, not because it hasn't supplied something helpful, but because it's eroded something necessary, which is confidence. So I don't know, for example, that my mum loves me. I can't put that love under a microscope. I see it in the way in which she relates to me and what she does and her words, but I don't actually know with 100% certainty that she loves me or not. I take that on the basis of confidence and trust, and in our relationship. And so yeah, that would be a starter to start answering that question.
Yeah, no, that's a helpful, and yeah, great question. It's from Anonymous. I don't know who asked it, but yeah, no, great question. Thank you very much, Anonymous. That was helpful. Someone else has asked a question, kind of coming back on the Christian kind of section. It says this: look, you say to know about Jesus, we should examine the evidence. Where would you suggest someone starts when they want to look for the truth?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking me that. I guess kind of putting together some of the clues, the pieces of our conversation thus far this evening, is that we want to listen to an authoritative voice. And so as we listen to the authoritative voice of God in his word, that we come to see who God is. So for example, that verse that you mentioned, I'm the way, the truth, and life, no one comes to the Father except through me, that's a verse that's in John's Gospel. So I'd recommend reading John's Gospel, because that is written, John tells us, so that we may know that Jesus is the Son of God, so that we may believe, trust him, and have eternal life. Now, that is a huge claim. I mean, that is why that book is written, so that we can know and have life. Amazing place to start. And so in that sense, when we read, when you pick it up and you open it and you start to read those words, we want to be following the clues. So we want to pick up these kind of little pieces from here and there. John is being very selective about what he's seen Jesus do, because he's writing for that particular purpose. So picking up those different pieces, and we want to be asking ourselves, does this ring true? Like, does this ring true with your experience of the world, of others? And in humility, can we allow ourselves to be challenged by something that's very unusual and very unexpected, like the resurrection, for example, which we'd expect to happen if God really exists, but not to happen if he doesn't. And so I think it's reading that, following the clues, and allowing ourselves to be open and asking ourselves the question as we go through, could this possibly be true? Because if it is, then big claim that John makes, you might know Jesus and have life. Huge. So I'd start there. I'd start in John's Gospel. That'd be a great place to start.
That's great. And to folk at home, if you're watching this, you can you could, if you want to go to our church website, it's abercec.org, abercec.org. You can contact us there, and we can get a John's Gospel to you. We can even give you a little book to help you go through John's Gospel. If you want to have a John's Gospel, or perhaps if a friend's invited you to watch this, you might want to go back to them and say, hey, what is this John's Gospel? Can we read it together? Can you help me get through John's Gospel? Because it really is amazing when you see kind of these kind of blocks of evidence kind of put in front of you and claims kind of proven. But I mean, in terms of knowing, you said earlier on, I don't want to misquote,
Go
but,
for it. What did I say?
We can't know truth kind of exhaustively, but we can know truly. And so you've got, Jesus coming and making these claims, which I guess are outside of our experience in many senses, but then puts this evidence that is now available to investigate. I put a question to you. The step then to believing is faith. Is that irrational? Is that just turning your brain off, or is it something else? What is that faith, and how does somebody find it?
Oh, what a lovely question. Thank you. Yeah. This was one of the things that I struggled with, I think, when I was first investigating the claims of Jesus for myself, was that I looked around and I saw these really nice Christians, but I just kind of thought, you've left your brain at the door, mate. Like, dead men don't rise. That's just ridiculous. And so I think one of the things that I really appreciated was thinking about faith in three ways. And so again, looking back, because the best minds have come before us anyway, there's a way in which the reformers have understood faith. And there are three elements to it, and they're all in Latin, alas. The first one is notitia, the second one is assensus, and the third one is fiducia, or fiducia. You could pronounce that with a hard C if you wanted to.
So after the COVID-19 response in America.
Sorry?
Isn't that the guy in America, Dr. Fiducia or something?
Really?
No.
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Are they trustworthy? That is the question.
Yeah,
This could completely undermine everything. So there are those three elements. Three elements. So notitia is that the content of faith. So you have to believe in something or in someone. That's to do with the content. You then got the assensus, which is the conviction that what you believe in is actually true. You can know, because it's possible to know something and yet not believe it to be true. So you could think, oh yeah, like I know what Christianity is, I understand it as a system, but I don't believe it to be true. And then there's the third element, fiducia, which is the personal trust and reliance upon something. So to have that kind, to have a faith in like a biblical sense of the term faith, it's knowing something, knowing it to be true, and then trusting it. So there are those three elements of notitia, it's the content of faith. You know something, you know it to be true, assensus, and fiducia, you trust it. So then you act on the basis of the content of what you know, which is to be true, and that shapes your response. You're trusting in a person. And so for us, that really centers and hinges upon the person of Jesus himself. And so no, this isn't a blind faith, because a blind faith wouldn't have the elements of assensus, like the conviction that this is actually true. Because on what basis do you know that something is true? We are looking at the evidence, but again, like as I was talking about those clues, there's an unspecifiable moment at which they come together transformatively. So if you were to talk to any Christian, I mean, they might remember kind of like a day or an hour, but I don't have that, when they kind of saw these clues coming together and they're saying, oh yeah, at that moment, I actually believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that he did take on all of my guilt, and that he rose from the grave, which means that I now have peace with God forever. Like, that's incredible. But they won't be able to tell you kind of, oh yeah, this is what changed. Because in that moment, suddenly these neurons are now firing in a different way, or this happened in that way. It's not like that. It's an unspecifiable moment, but that doesn't mean that you've thrown your brain out. You've been carefully following and weighing the clues. And to the point that even when we read the scriptures and Paul talks about the resurrection, for example, he says that if this doesn't happen, then we are to be pitied more than anybody else. And so for me, even as a Christian today, I'd say I'm open to the evidence, that if you were to produce the evidence and show me that Jesus did not rise from the grave, then I'll follow those clues and I'll cast this off. So there's a challenge for you. But I think that's it. It's being open and following these clues where they go in humility, and not martial your control, thinking that there's a certain outcome. Because if you enter this thinking God does not exist, then obviously your outcome is going to be God does not exist. But if you go into it not thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to leave my brain and just kind of take this on in blind faith, but if you enter it thinking, actually, I'm going to see where this goes, could this be true? Then it's at that moment that truth can really reveal himself to you in incredible ways. So
That's really helpful. I think I love that kind of. I guess we go full circle now, thinking back on your kind of PhD, darkness into light. Faith isn't just a jump into the dark, but actually through investigation, it's a step into the light, which is a person, Jesus, who has revealed himself to us. Which is a wonderful, encouraging way to think about the Christian faith. And to folk at home, who are investigating, please contact us if you want a John's Gospel. Speak to someone who maybe invited you to this to find out more. We'd love to help you to investigate more and to find out and to come to know this truth personally. Christy, thank you so much for your time. It's flown by. It's been a real stretch for our minds this evening. And thank you so much for giving us your time. And to everybody else back home, we hope you enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much for taking part in our poll and sending in questions. And if we can answer anything more, then please contact us privately. But from me, Jonathan, and from Christy, thank you so much. And we'll see you again next time. God bless.